In the spring of 1957, the Jackson Sun wrote this: "The sun won't shine quite so brightly for a group of lads after today's announcement that their librarian at Alexander School is going to marry someone else. The personable lady causing all the queries of, 'Why didn't she wait for me?' is none other than pretty pedagogue Elizabeth Roberts, and the man causing all the trouble is Lowell King." Our protagonist met via way the double date routine several years ago when they celebrated Halloween with friends, and from that gala holiday forward, theirs has been one series of dates. Strictly for the record, it was during the Yuletide holidays that Lowell slipped an exquisitely mounted diamond solitaire on Elizabeth's engagement ring finger to seal an understanding that has been existent for many months. Now plans are being completed for an April trip down the orange blossom-strewn altar at First Christian Church, after which Mr. and Mrs. Lowell King will be at home to their friends in Beach Bluff, Tennessee. And here we are with Elizabeth King today, March 15th, the Ides of March, 2004. We are in her home in Jackson, Tennessee, and she's here to talk to us today about the Roberts family, and which is her family of origin. And so I want to ask you a few questions today. Of course, everybody in the family knows Miss King as Ziba. And Ziba, why don't you start off by telling us about your parents, your family of origin, and your brothers and sisters. Just a few words about each of those.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Roberts King, and I have been known as Ziba. The origin of the name Ziba is unknown, and the only other person that I know of who bears this name is a servant of Solomon's mentioned in the Bible. I don't think that my name came from the Bible, but it has been my name, and all of the people who know me best call me Ziba. I am the third child of George Wesley and Pauline Hayes Roberts. I was born in Madison County, but moved to 359 North Liberty Street when I was a very small child, and lived there until I married in 1957. I was born September 21st, 1920, which makes it very easy for people to calculate my age, being 80 years old in the year 2000. My sister, Virginia, was the eldest of the children, and according to all birth order books, she was the bossy child. And then my older brother was George, myself, and then my younger brother, Will. According to the birth order book, sometimes the baby of the family is considered to be petted and pampered, and although Will he was a great joy to the family, always being very pleasant around the home. This is a picture of our mother and Virginia and George. I think this picture was made in Alamo, Tennessee, when Virginia was about 7 and George was about 3. A few years after the photograph that we've just seen was made, I was born. This is a picture of me when I was a baby, the only existing picture because cameras and photographers were much rarer then than they are now. This is a picture of Pauline Hayes. It was probably made about the time that she attended the old MCFI College in Jackson, Tennessee. This was a forerunner of Lambeth College. It was a Methodist college. She attended for several years but did not graduate. This is a picture of our mother. All 4 of us children often use the word admiration in talking about our mother because she was the source of the inspiration for the family. She was also the one who worked because our father was an invalid in a wheelchair. But our mother was a person who had a very outstanding memory. One of our childhood memories is that she would discipline us by using quotations. One of my favorite words was that one time when I had misbehaved, she looked very straight at me and said, "For sweetest things turn sour by their deeds. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds." And since I didn't want to be a weed, I decided to straighten up and fly right. She could quote large passages from classic writers and Shakespeare, and she was a very good Bible student. This is a picture that was made in front of the house on North Liberty Street. When Will came home from the Army, he had pictures of the family. Going from left is a picture of myself, my mother, Charles Warmoth, who is the husband of Virginia, my father in the forefront, my sister Virginia, and their son, Charles Warmoth Jr., who lived with us until he went away to college when they moved and had a home of their own. This is a picture made the same day when Will came home from the Army on leave, made in front of our house on North Liberty Street. This is a picture of Virginia and of me. Virginia was 7 years older than I. She and her husband, Charles, lived in our home until Charles Jr. went away to college, and then they obtained a home of their own. Virginia was a very conscientious, hard worker, and to us children, she was somewhat of a slave driver. But at her funeral, the word duty was mentioned over several times, and that was a word that was very applicable to her because she knew her duty and she performed it. We all admired her diligence very much. This is a picture of the front porch of the home on North Liberty Street of Elizabeth and Will and Daddy. This front porch played a pretty important part in our life because it was a wide front porch extending across the front of the house. And there was not a lot of activity on North Liberty Street, but whatever happened, we could see it from this front porch. We would gather there at night, and that was our form of entertainment. Sometimes neighbors would come over there, and we would sit there and talk and tell about the happenings of the day. Our father, even though he was in a wheelchair, had a very active mind, and he did a lot about helping in the home. Our mother was a splendid cook. She was well known for her cooking, and he would help prepare the food. He would peel the produce, and he would grate coconuts, and he was a very helpful person in that respect. Then he was always there when the children came home from school. We did not ever come home to an empty house. He was a very pleasant person, and he delighted in collecting funny stories, and he was very politically minded. He read everything that he could lay his hands on that would substantiate his belief in the Republican Party. For many years, he subscribed to the Chicago Tribune. And what he didn't already believe about the Republican Party, why that would help to make it firm in his mind. This is a picture of Elizabeth, Will, and Daddy. This is a picture of Elizabeth, Daddy, and Charles Jr., the son of Virginia. George Roberts was a salesman for grocery concerns. He worked for Felsenthal for many years. On one occasion when he had been ill, it was written in the Jackson Sun that George Roberts of Jackson is again on the road with the order book and sample case. George is a Crockett County boy and one of the most popular traveling salesmen in this section. He has been off duty for some time on account of ill health, and his many friends were glad to see him again when he returned. When Daddy traveled, it was the custom for salesmen to stay in hotels they would often gather in the main room of the hotel and swap stories. And so he was a good salesman and also a good companion for other traveling salesmen because of his sense of humor. And he did really enjoy telling jokes, and he was a really good storyteller. He could tell stories very convincingly. This is a picture of Daddy and his brother and his two sisters. Going from left to right, and you cannot see her very well, is Irene, George, Haney, who was also a salesman, and Matalou, who was in some ways the family scapegoat, because we ascribed many stories to her that maybe she didn't appreciate if she knew about them. My father was a letter writer and a word lover, and he always liked to use big words, sometimes in very appropriate places, but not always. If he could find that he could say something in 8 words instead of 1, he enjoyed doing that. My father enjoyed writing letters, and I regret that I did not take care of some of the letters that he wrote me, because they showed his vocabulary, I think, to a very good extent. But I do have one that he wrote in 1953 while I was visiting in New York. This is just a portion of that which I would like to read. It calls the name of Alamo, where Wesley and I are planning to go today and look over the territory. This is a part of a 4-page letter that he wrote, and I think will give an example of his interest in many things. Dear Girlie, Ma in Virginia came in with a bushel of real nice peaches, and Ma put me to peeling peaches so that she could make us some of that nice peach preserves that she can do so well. And believe me, the ones I ate for breakfast this a.m., I can really report were larrikin and fit for the gods. Don't let your mouth watering get you down. There will be some left for you to have a little smidgen of a bit when you arrive back home. Or are the surroundings up there so great and beautiful that you may decide to cast your lot there? Don't contemplate any such action on your part. We don't want your decision to overcome you to remain there. We will await your telling us about your trip with eagerness. Virginia and Charles came by, loaded me in the new Chevy, and Ma got in, and we made a very pleasurable drive from here to Alamo, thence to Trenton, on to Milan, then Humboldt, more than 100 miles. I used to travel all that country weekly, but it sure did not like it. It seemed like it did then. New routes, roads, and so forth that I might have gotten lost. Ma and Virginia made some preserves Tuesday night for Virginia. They too were very delicious. Darling, that's about all I know. And both ladies, Ma and Virginia, continued or suggested that I write a short letter when I told them that. Now we do hope that you will continue to have a huge time and will return to us soon. Ma is ready to take off for the office and will direct this message to you. All love from us, as ever, Ma and Pop. That's typical of his saying, instead of, we'll mail this letter to you, he said that he would direct this message to you. This is one of my favorite pictures of Mother. It was made in what we call the back hall of our home on North Liberty Street. After Mother was living alone, she used this back hall as her little den. But all during the time that we were growing up, this back hall had the telephone, the only phone in the house. And the word privacy was not a word that needed to be used very often in our home because we just didn't have that much privacy. And Lowell would say that one of the reasons that it took us so long to decide to get married because When he would call, all the family would be listening to the telephone conversations. And this is a picture of Mother talking on the phone. I like it because it's dressed as she ordinarily dressed, and it shows the element of surprise that she had when she was caught and not completely dressed. This is a picture of Mother made after my wedding. It was made at the wedding supper given by Virginia and Charles, George and Francis at the home of Virginia and Charles on Westwood. This is a picture that was made in the living room of the home on North Liberty Street. It was made in front of the fireplace, and that was in the corner of the living room. That was one of 4 fireplaces in that house. This picture was made at Christmas time before Lowell and I married. That's a picture of me, of Mother, Virginia, Charles, and Lowell, and we're rejoicing about our Christmas presents. Mother enjoyed the holidays very much, and we always had a very happy Christmas time. She was such a good cook, and we would spend a lot of time in preparation for the holidays, especially baking. Our food that we had for eating was really outstanding. I think that's one reason that we never felt deprived that we didn't eat out in restaurants, because we put a lot of stress on cooking at home, and it was really good food. It's very interesting that food that is considered expensive now was not considered expensive then, such as oysters. They were very reasonably priced, and you could have them often. We would go to the grocery store. We would walk to the grocery store because we did not have a car. And so oftentimes the child would accompany Mother, or the children would be sent for food. Food was very reasonably priced now. I know on one occasion Mother came home and thought that we were ruined financially because we would go to the grocery store formerly and buy bananas by the dozen, and then they started pricing bananas by the pound. And she said, well, how are you going to buy a dozen bananas when they're priced by the pound? This is another picture made in front of the fireplace in the living room at another time of Christmas when Lois and Will came down. This picture shows Lois, Elizabeth, Charles, Mother, and Will, and Virginia. Not in the complete order, but that's the personages in the picture. It was a great joy to us when Will married Lois, because she enjoyed coming to Jackson very much. And Will has told me since that she would often make the suggestion that they would come to Jackson. And we would be so excited when the children began to come along. We would be so excited that we could hardly sleep because they were coming. And Lois would tell me that she couldn't tell some of the children because they would get so excited they wouldn't sleep. So it was a very, very joyful occasion. And in a 2-bedroom house, to have that many people as guests and as live-in residents, it's really puzzling to me now about where they were placed. I don't know. Mother was a very hard worker. She really did love to travel. It was worked out very, very nicely that in later years she was able to travel some on trips with Will, and they had many enjoyable trips together. On one occasion, my mother and I went to Washington and to New York on the bus. She never one time said that she was tired, although we would sleep on the bus at night. We would go traveling sleeping on the bus at night. Someone had told me that while we were in New York, if we rerouted our trip, we could go to Niagara Falls, although we would have to spend an extra night on the bus. I told Mother about it, and she said, well, that would be just fine. So we rerouted our ticket, and we did go to Niagara Falls and spend an extra night on the bus. And again, she never one time said she was tired. Mother worked for Boswell and Hall. Then the agency was sold to Will S. Hall. It was an insurance agency. She worked there for 40 years and retired. I never felt that she was really happily retired, as some people might be, because she had such a philosophy of being needed. She always said that she thought that one of the great things in life was to be needed. She had a servant's heart. She loved to be waiting on people and serving people. She had a wonderful relationship with all of the customers who would come into the agency there. She was very respectful of everyone and treated everyone equally, and I don't imagine that she ever said a really cross, negative word to any customer who came into that office. We children would go and meet her after work if it were dark in the winter time and walk home with her. We had some very pleasant times of conversation walking home from the office to home, which was less than a mile from the office. Miss Fanny Brown was a teacher in junior high school. She taught Will and she taught me in civics. When you took Miss Fanny Brown's civics course, you knew something about the government, the Constitution, the Congress. She was really an outstanding teacher. She was a maiden lady who rented out rooms. She rented out a room to Lowell King when he worked at the Arsenal in Milan during World War II, when rooms were really at a premium because there were so many people who were working in government-sponsored places. Miss Fanny Brown was also a friend of my mother's, and on one occasion she invited my mother to go on a trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. While they were on this trip to Gatlinburg, my mother told Miss Fanny this story. This story was a family story that had been told and retold many times. Miss Fanny's nephew asked her to write it down. She was a person who was born in the Victorian age where they used a lot of words, and so this story is representative of that fact that they wanted to add words and multisyllable words to their stories. She titled her story, The Young Stoic. Pauline, Mrs. George Roberts, with quivering nerves and accompanied by a fearfully beating heart, was not taking the bull by the horns, but her car by the steering wheel. She wanted to learn the art, the mechanics, or what have you, of driving. She had mastered the ABCs of driving, but she was not yet a graduate. One Sunday afternoon, she was chauffeuring Mr. Roberts and two of the children, George Travis, a small boy about 4 years old, and little Elizabeth, a few months old. They were going to visit relatives in a neighboring town. Pauline had trained her children in obedience to the nth degree, and on this Sunday's drive, it was proven how well her teachings were applied. The two children were riding on the back seat. The mother had told them they must not stand at her back and talk to her or ask her any questions. So they played together among themselves on the back seat of the car. Pauline, still a novice at the wheel, was so absorbed in her job of managing the car that she had left George Travis in full charge and with her full confidence of his management of little Elizabeth on the back seat. Finally, the prattle and the noise from that direction became conspicuous by its absence. Pauline's attention was distracted, and she said, without looking back, "George Travis, where is Elizabeth?" With apparent unconcern and slow deliberation and stoicism, he drawled out, "She fell out back yonder." Fortunately, the fall from the window had occurred only a few seconds prior to the discovery. When the panic-stricken mother looked out the front window, she saw her precious little girl sitting in the sand on the roadside. She backed the car to the scene of the near tragedy and found Elizabeth whimpering gently. She was unhurt, except her feelings were hurt, and she was apparently happy to be reunited with her family. Mother was born in the year 1889, but we always thought that she was born in the year 1890. But one time when I was in high school, my mother said to me, "I have something that I want to tell you, and it's very important." And my heart just stopped beating because I couldn't think of anything that would be that serious. The message that she had for me was that she really had given the wrong date of birth because in applying for a job, it was to her advantage to appear younger, so she had lied about it. And for years, that had been on her conscience because honesty was a key word with her, and she had to confess to somebody, so I was the one who heard the confession. She was a product of the Victorian age, the age at which manners were extremely important. They were somewhat complicated. My mother wanted to teach me manners, and she spent some time doing it. Once when I was in the 3rd grade, I was going to a birthday party. She would set me down, and she was really giving me high training in good manners. She said to me, "Now they will serve you ice cream and cake. You eat your ice cream and cake. They might ask you if you want more ice cream or more cake. And you say, 'No, thank you, I do not.'" I said, "Well, Mother, suppose I do want more ice cream and cake." She said, "Forget it, just say no thank you." The dwelling of a family plays a very important part in their lives. My mother and father were planning to move from the country into Jackson. At that time, there were 2 houses on the market for sale in Jackson. One was on Division Street, which was considered a distance out from town. One was on North Liberty Street. My mother and father decided to buy the home on North Liberty Street. And that proved to be a very fine choice because from this home we walked to grammar school, we walked to junior high school, we walked to high school and to college. And then when people went to work, they walked to town to work from this home, located at 359 North Liberty Street. When I think about this house, I think about how much noise this house absorbed because there was always a large number of people going and coming from the house and living there at different times. So the fact that it absorbed a lot of noise certainly kept our nerves from being frayed. The house was built by a Jewish family who had some connections with the city of St. Louis. They had a few things made in St. Louis that were unusual for the house. Among them, the carvings in the dining room, which we'll show you a picture of one of them, and the light fixtures. Some of those light fixtures had beads on them, so they were a precursor to some of the modern lamps that we have with beads on them. One of the things that was very enjoyable about the house at North Liberty was the porch. The porch was large. For many years it was not screened in. Later we did have it screened in to keep the mosquitoes away. In extremely hot weather, it was always really, really nice to have the porch in summer weather because we would congregate there. Neighbors also would congregate there, and a lot of our entertainment was sitting on that porch discussing the events of the day. A specific example of that is when the Darwin Tuffets were born, the neighbors came, and I remember a lot of conversations about which one of the die on quintuplets was their favorite. And we could spend a lot of time discussing things like that. Later on, when my father was placed into a wheelchair, his condition caused him to be placed in a wheelchair, the house was a very lucky choice because it had a very wide hallway. It had very wide doors. It had that he could navigate where his wheelchair was large and cumbersome, but he could navigate that way. The house itself was arranged so that it was really actually a two-bedroom house. It had double parlor. It had a double parlor, which of course, with such a large family, we had to take this for a bedroom. But there were 4 fireplaces in this house. There was one in the at an angle set into the living room, and on the back side of that was a fireplace in the dining room. There was a fireplace in this, what was originally the double parlor, and we turned into a bedroom, and there was a fireplace on the opposite side of that in the bedroom. There were large double pocket doors that you entered on 2 sides, from the living room into the bedroom and from the living room into the dining room. The dining room had double windows, and there were 2 rooms of 2 windows in the living room. So it was a light place. It was not, even on a dark day, it wasn't a very dark place like some houses of that period. From the dining room going into a pantry, there was a swinging door, and there was a large built-in, which would hold a lot of things for a large family, which we call the pantry, and the swinging doors went into that. This was the kitchen, and in the wintertime we had a table, a round table, and the mealtime was an extremely important part of our life because everyone looked forward to, we walked a lot during the daytime, and we came in from our various and sundry responsibilities. We gathered at the table, and we really treasured the time that we spent together, where we would tell about the happenings of the day and about the politics that was going on. We were one of the few families, I suppose, that had a utility room, but we did have a utility room where the washing took place, and where when we got a washing machine, it was placed back there also. This long hallway served a lot of purposes. My father enjoyed navigating his wheelchair up and down there, and children loved to run and play games there. The first year that I taught school was in 1941, just prior to World War II. Since I lived relatively close to the school, many children would come home from school with me, and they would run up and down this hallway and play, and luckily, again, absorbing a lot of noise. This was the back porch of the home, and we had that screened in at a later date, and that was our summer dining room. It had built-in benches, and we would all congregate out there for our meals, the same as we had done in the kitchen. This was used as a bedroom. It was occupied at different times by different people. My aunt, Lucille Sparkman, came and lived with us for a while. She came from Dallas, Texas, and she lived in this room. Virginia and Charles married, and they had this bedroom for their room, but we all ate our meals together. Virginia was a very good cook and a very good organizer, and we would have good meals with her help also. Then there was a swinging door that went from this bedroom into a little hallway, and this was a bedroom at the back here, and there was a little swinging door that went there. Then there was this hallway. The important fact about the family organization is that when there's one bathroom and 8 people at a time living in the same house, you really have to be firmly fixed in your attitude toward the bathroom. And it was a gentleman's agreement that if anyone really needed the bathroom, the person who was occupying it would give it up for the time being. But my mother was very firm in allowing all the noise that anyone wanted to make. She didn't care how much noise children made, whether they hollered or whatever, but she absolutely would forbid fussing and raising your voice in anger. So the house, we all considered, as we look back on it, we considered it a pleasant home and an interesting home, because we all brought our interest into the home, and we were always allowed to express our opinions and to express our thoughts, and we weren't squelched about that. And I still prize that went on in our home. This house was on a 50-foot lot, which didn't leave a lot of room for yard play, but we played up and down the street in neighbors' yards and felt safe doing so. There were just a few steps that went up on the front porch, but the back steps were high. And of course, we had clotheslines back in the back and hung our clothes out to dry. And it was always a matter of some labor to keep a lookout for the weather so that the clothes didn't get rained on. And I remember a number of occasions when the clothes were frozen and we had to hasten out and get the clothes because they were frozen. I don't know whether you noticed already or not, but there weren't many closets in this house. There was a very small closet in this bedroom, but here off the hall, there was what we called the dark closet. One of my pleasant memories was that we had access to that closet all here, but before the time for Santa Claus to come, we were forbidden to go into the closet, the dark closet. And we weren't as sophisticated as children were now. We didn't put it all together that the reason that we didn't go into the dark closet was because Santa Claus was coming. But this, we all stored things in the dark closet. Later on, we had closets that were protruded from the hall where we hung our clothes. Hetty remembers that those closets that were built in, and she also remembers a screen that was placed in the hall to hide some of the activities that were going on. I don't remember exactly how wide the lot was. I think it was perhaps 125 feet. In the back, there was a servant's house. We rented that servant's house for many years. Black people always lived in that servant's house, and we had a lot of amusement about associating with the black people. One of them was named Fred Fields. My father enjoyed Fred Fields as a friend as much as anybody could enjoy a friend. His wife's name was Viola, and she would help us some in the house, but not on a regular basis. That house was rented out for many years. It had an outdoor plumbing, and I think if the government would have had hold of that house, they would have been after us and after that house before that. There was also a garage out there where we stored things. One of the things that was stored out there were fruit jars. Back in those times, the government had a program where they would can food for the school lunch program. And we would save jars, fruit jars, for these people who did this canning for the school lunch program, and we kept them in that garage, which was in the back of the house. One time, our adventuresome brother George climbed up on top of that garage, and he fell off and hit his head on a can, and he bore that scar for the rest of his life because he had fallen off that garage. That's all I think of. This is a panel that was in the dining room placed above the mantel, And that mantel had two doors, which also had carvings on the doors of the mantel. For years and years, we thought that this was carved in St. Louis, and we had a very interesting tale about the wooden carving that was carved in St. Louis. When we moved from that house, we took the panel down and we found that it was a molded form, and that disillusioned us a bit, but I still treasure having that memento of the house on North Liberty Street hanging in my den. It's been a great pleasure to have Wesley visiting with me, and for me to be able to recall these memories. I think that it's a secret ambition of every 83-year-old woman or man that they can record their memories and have someone with willing ears to hear it, and then to have a video recording is an extra special bonus. When we are young, we smile and say we had no care in childhood's day. But we'll be wrong, 'twill not be true. I've this much care, I care for you. I'm quoting Mary Engelbrecht's calendar verse because I certainly care for each one of you who might listen to this, or even part of it if you get worn out. Today we're going to have a really good time, I think, visiting with some of the places that we've mentioned. We will visit the scene where the House of North Liberty stood. That house was purchased by the Jackson Energy Authority, and it is said that they are going to build a Cablevision company there, and I hope that's true. Then we're going to plan to go to the scene of Alexander School that Will and I attended, and we'll tell you just a little bit about that. The high school is still standing. It was combined with the school for black people called Mary High School that was named for a man named Mary, and it's now called the Jackson Mary School. We'll visit the junior high school, which is still standing. We'll visit the scene of the First Christian Church, which has been replaced by a bank. We're also planning to go to the Carnegie Library. That played an important part in the life of Will and my life also, because that's where we would walk to get our library books. And then we are planning to go to the Jackson Library, which is the replacement for the Carnegie. A friend has provided us with the record of the paternal grandparent cemetery. We're also hoping to go to the cemetery which the children have visited on several occasions, where the maternal grandparents are buried and where Uncle Robbie is buried. And then we plan to go to Pond Creek Cemetery in Crockett County, which is where the paternal grandparents are buried. In between, we're going to find us a place to eat lunch. I think Crockett County Country Cooking will be the order of that lunch. This is the lot where 359 North Liberty, and it is being worked up to be the Jackson Energy Authority's Cablevision station. The house was next door to probably the most historical house in Jackson, which we always call the Miller House. There was a famous murder that took place in connection with the Millers, and it's written up in Historic Madison, which is the history book about Madison County. And as children, we were always fascinated by that story. And by this is the front of the old Miller House, as we called it. It was said to be built prior to the Civil War. This is the railroad bed of the Illinois Central Railroad, which went from Chicago to New Orleans. One of the most glamorous things that happened in our childhood was to come down to this railroad track and see the streamlined train, the city of New Orleans. We thought that the people who were making that trip, getting to eat on their dining cars, was probably the very height of sophistication and glamour. When a group of children would gather down here to watch the trains go by, there were many engineers who were kind enough to blow the whistle, and they would always wave at us. We thought that that was a high point of the day, to get to see the trains go by, to hear the whistles and to be waved at. This is the dead end of North Liberty Street. It was known in my childhood as the Camel's Back. I considered it a shortcut to walking to school, but since it was uninhabited and looked a little bit dangerous, my mother did not want me going through the Camel's Back. But there was a lot of sand down there, and I would have to scoot around quite a bit. So when I would get home, there would be a lot of the remnants of the sand of Camel's Back. My mother would then accuse me of disobeying her rule, and I always wondered how she knew that I had, but now I know. This is an old Alexander school where Will and I attended school, grades 1 through 6. This school had an upstairs, as you see from the picture, and a downstairs. In the center of the school, in each upstairs and downstairs, there was a large hall, and they call that the study hall. All of the classrooms were built around the study hall. There was a study hall teacher whose duty it was to keep order. While half the class studied in the classroom, the other class sat in the study hall and studied. We were arranged in our desk by height, the smallest child being at the front and the largest one, tallest one, at the back. We were arranged every other seat. They thought that that would prevent note passing and whispering up and down the aisles, but alas, it did not. The person who kept the study hall had to be quite a sergeant, a strict sergeant, and they always had the reputation of being very, very strict. At the change of class, when you go from your classroom to this study hall, they would have a teacher who came out and played the piano, and we marched to the classroom. We would stand in the classroom until the teacher entered. Had she gone out of the room for a few minutes, we were not seated until that teacher came into the classroom and gave us the order to sit down. So in some ways it was sort of like military. This school did not have indoor plumbing. The plumbing was on the outside of the school, and the fragrance that came from that outdoor, which was in the basement, was an unforgettable fragrance, to say the least. When we were in the grades 1 through 3, we had a hall teacher who would give permission to leave the building and go to the restroom. Oftentimes, when you were tired of sitting in the study hall, you would ask for that permission. Her question invariably was, "Are you compelled to go?" And until I was a grown woman, I thought that the word compel meant that you really, really had to go to the bathroom and just couldn't wait. The teachers varied quite a bit. There were more than one teacher to each grade, and of course, word would quickly spread about who were the good teachers, meaning who were less strict than others. But they were many conscientious teachers. Their duties were always to sit on the playground and see that we played, but unsupervised play, but kept everything very peaceful. And each Will and I spent 6 years of our life at this school. Then, strangely enough, by coincidence, when the new school, Alexander School, was built in 1950, I came to the new Alexander School, as the school librarian. So the name Alexander has played an important part in my life. This present playground of Alexander School is the location of the old Alexander School, which was torn down and the new one built in 1950. This is the Alexander School, built in 1950. I came as librarian and occupied the rooms, which is immediately to the left, for 30 happy and I hope profitable years. It was a great privilege to work with those children's books and with the children. This is the former Jackson High School, where all four of us attended high school for 3 years. They had some splendid teachers here. When I went to Union, it was very easy for me to follow their pattern because the teachers had really given a good foundation. And overall, I think that it was considered a very good high school. It was built about the year 1929, and it has been kept up and was combined with Mary High School, which was an all-black school, and then it was named Jackson Mary, the Mary being the name of a prominent black educator. It is one of 3 high schools in Madison County now, and it is now the Madison Magnet School, High School. This is the old junior high school building where all 4 of us attended 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. We had good teachers in this building, and we had a lot of friends, made a lot of friends coming from this building. When I began my teaching career, I taught English in this building for 3 years, 7th grade English, and I still consider it one of the most comfortable buildings I was ever in, although it had no air conditioning. The walls were very thick, and it was a really comfortable building to teach in. In recent years, a Nashville businessman bought this building for $1, and it was his wish to restore the building. But as you can see, it has come upon some hard times, and he has not progressed very far. I have hopes that he will get this building restored, because I think that there are interesting things that could take place here, but his progress has been very, very slow. This is the Carnegie Library, which was very important to us as children and grown-ups also, because we could cross the railroad tracks and walk up to the Carnegie Library in about 5 minutes from our house and check out our books, and we really did make good use of this library. In 1964, they were without a librarian in the summer, so they called me, and I was the librarian in the summertime for that time, and I was glad that I had a chance to work on the card catalog and to meet a lot of people. It was a very interesting place to work. Then they built the new library. After that, it fell into disrepair, and it was a massive effort to restore it, but it is restored now, and it's used very often for very formal weddings and other kinds of parties. It's also a center where they have art exhibits and other exhibits. We are now in Crockett County. Daddy was born in Crockett County and lived in Crockett County until his mature years. He always called Crockett County the garden spot of the earth, and many of his fondest memories were connected with Crockett County. This is the Pond Creek Church in Crockett County. The cemetery is the cemetery where the paternal grandfather and grandmother are buried, and several of the siblings. are also buried here. We have memories of coming to Pond Creek Cemetery on several occasions at homecoming time. And they would have dinner on the grounds and they would have delicious spreads of food. One year they forgot to bring drinks, and so we had good food, but we were very thirsty when we left. Several of the siblings of my father are buried here, but not all of them are buried here. The mother, the father, a grown son, and a grown sister, a grown daughter of the family, and 2 infants were buried here. This is the tombstone of grandfather and grandmother. We did not know grandfather. Grandmother was a very tiny person and a very cheerful person. My main memories of her are singing. She always was singing, and very happily. She was very fond of her grandchildren, and she always made us feel very welcome if we visited in her home. The home was managed by the daughter, Mattie Lou, who was mentally challenged, and she willed the home and was really the head of the home. And so it was not the most enjoyable, and we don't have the very fondest memories of visiting in that home. Winnie Roberts, mother of George Roberts. This picture was made in 1929 or 1930 when she was in her middle 70s living in Murray City, Tennessee. The tombstone of Mattie Lou, who was George's sister and who lived in the home in Murray City. This is the Smith Jewett Cemetery in Madison County. It is a very old cemetery, and it is the place where the several members of the Hayes family are buried, including Papa Hayes, Mama Hayes, and Uncle Robbie Hayes. This is the grave of Dr. Cotton, who was the first husband of our grandmother. They had 2 children who died and are buried in this cemetery, and the other child was Lucille Sparkman, the half sister of our mother. She lived in our home on North Liberty Street for several years. The grave of Ella Virginia Hayes, who was the mother of Pauline Roberts. The father, Robert Jones Hayes, the father of Pauline Roberts. Robert Elisha Hayes, the uncle of Elizabeth and Will, Virginia and George. He was a beloved uncle because he loved his nieces and nephews dearly. He lived in New York City after his return from World War I because he was there and fell in love with the city, and he never came back to Madison County until he was in his 90s, at which time he came and lived in the homes of Virginia and Elizabeth for several months until he was placed in a retirement home and died in Nashville, Tennessee, where he was looked after by the nieces and nephews in a very loving way. Our trip into the past has been very enjoyable. Our present stay with Wesley, we've appreciated and enjoyed it. And I would like to say to all of the ones who are coming along in future generations that I hope that you will have a wonderful philosophy of life, that you will enjoy your life very much, and that you will appreciate all of the good things that come to you. Have faith in God. Be careful and enjoy your life here. That might be not too much.